Welcome back to Screen Scan. Today, I'll take you on a captivating journey as we dive into the details of the gripping 2005 film, Just Like Heaven. Soon after David Abbott moves into his new apartment in San Francisco, he gets a surprise. A girl named Elizabeth Martinson claims the apartment is hers and then suddenly disappears. When she keeps showing up and disappearing, David thinks she's a ghost, but Elizabeth believes she's still alive. Get ready to unravel the story, dissect the characters, and relive the emotions. Buckle up as we embark on this captivating recap. Let's begin. Opening scene. Dr. Elizabeth Masterson, Witherspoon, is sitting in a nice garden with a lot of fog. The camera moves through the fog and shows her sitting in a chair that looks strange in the pretty garden. Elizabeth then wakes up in a hospital break room. Someone tells her she fell asleep and needs to go home because she's been there for 23 hours. She says she can't go home because she needs to keep working to become the main doctor. A series of scenes show Elizabeth working hard in the hospital. She is very good at her job and is kind to her patients. We also meet her rival, Brett, who is competing with her for the top doctor position. We find out that her sister is expecting her for dinner, where she will meet someone new. After she hangs up the phone, Elizabeth and Brett run into their boss, Dr. Walsh. Dr. Walsh tells them about a gunshot victim that needs help. Both Elizabeth and Brett volunteer, but since Brett has only been there for 12 hours, he gets to take it. After Brett leaves, Dr. Walsh tells Elizabeth that because of her excellent work and care for patients, she will get the top doctor position. He also tells her that 26 hours of work is enough and that she needs to go home. As Elizabeth leaves, she sees Brett in the parking lot. He isn't happy, but he still congratulates her on getting the job. On her way to her sister's house for dinner, she calls to say she's sorry for being late. Her sister, Abby, says it's okay because her date hasn't arrived yet. Suddenly, Elizabeth sees a truck coming towards her, and the screen goes black. Cut to David Abbott, Ruffalo, who is looking for a fully furnished apartment to rent. His pushy realtor keeps showing him strange places. Just as they are about to give up, a flyer blows into his face for an apartment they haven't seen yet. They go to check it out and find it's a nice place still available because it's rented month to month due to some mysterious reasons. David decides it's perfect anyway. We now see David sitting around drinking beer, not doing much else. One day, while he's watching TV, Elizabeth suddenly appears and tells David to get out of her apartment. They argue, and Elizabeth says she's going to call the police. David follows her into the next room, but when he gets there, she has vanished. David visits his friend John, who is also his therapist, because he thinks he's hallucinating. John tells him that he just needs to get out more and the hallucinations will stop. David ignores this advice and continues to be lazy and drink beer. He sees Elizabeth a few more times and starts to think she might be the ghost of someone who used to live in the apartment. He goes to an occult bookstore and meets Daryl, Heater, Napoleon from Napoleon Dynamite. Daryl gives him some books about ghosts. David takes the books home to confront Elizabeth. David tries to convince Elizabeth that she is a ghost, but she just tries to annoy him so he'll leave. Frustrated, David hires different people to get rid of the spirit. First, he calls a priest, then some Asian women who perform a ceremony, then some cheesy Ghostbusters, and finally Daryl. Daryl says he can sense Elizabeth and thinks she is so strong that she might not even be dead. Daryl also tells David that he needs to let go of the spirit haunting him, his wife who has passed away. After Daryl leaves, Elizabeth asks David about his wife. It's been 2 years since she died, and David still struggles to move on. Upset by the conversation, David decides to get drunk with his friend John. Elizabeth follows him to the bar and forces him to leave by possessing him. She tells David she needs help figuring out what happened to her because she can't remember. David agrees to help her, realizing that if he doesn't, he'll have to admit he's been talking to someone who isn't there, which would make him seem crazy. They start by visiting all the neighbors to ask about Elizabeth. None of them really knew her, but one girl starts flirting with David. They follow some other clues and discover that Elizabeth is in a coma at the hospital where she worked. During this time, David explains that he used to be a successful landscape architect who designed gardens. They visit one of his gardens, which turns out to be the same one Elizabeth dreamed about at the beginning of the movie. After finding Elizabeth's body, David goes home while Elizabeth stays at the hospital. Using her ability to walk through walls, Elizabeth checks on some of her friends and discovers that Brett, her rival, got the attending physician slot. Elizabeth's sister, Abby, visits and learns that Elizabeth had a living will, but the decision to let her go will be up to Abby. Elizabeth hurries back home and finds the neighbor girl flirting with David. The neighbor girl goes into the bedroom and asks David to join her. Elizabeth feels sad and goes to wait on the roof until David is finished. David later comes to the roof and says he sent the neighbor girl home. Elizabeth shares that she got the apartment because she wanted to make a garden on the roof. David promises he won't let Elizabeth die. First, they talk to Daryl, who advises them not to try to figure out how to put Elizabeth back in her body and why only David can see her. Then they visit Abby's house to convince her not to sign the paperwork, but she already has. When David tells Abby he can see Elizabeth's spirit, she chases him out with a butcher knife. With Elizabeth scheduled to die in the morning, she asks David to stay up and talk with her. In the morning, David suggests stealing Elizabeth's body to keep it safe, because he won't let her die. Elizabeth says they need someone with a van and no morals to even have a chance to do that. Next scene, David drives John's van to the hospital. Once there, David explains that his imaginary friend is actually alive. He convinces John of this because John knew Abby. David was supposed to be the blind date at the dinner Elizabeth was going to, but he got scared and Elizabeth got in the car accident. While John and David try to take Elizabeth's body, Brett interrupts them. David punches Brett and security is called. As John and David run from security, the machine keeping Elizabeth alive gets unplugged. As she starts to die, her spirit begins to fade. In a desperate move, David kisses Elizabeth, which brings her spirit back, but security quickly pulls him away. David watches as Elizabeth's spirit fades again. Then, miraculously, her body comes back to life, like Sleeping Beauty awakened by a kiss. Seeing that David revived Elizabeth, they let him go, but Elizabeth doesn't remember him. David leaves feeling very sad. Next comes another montage where both Elizabeth and David look sad. When the montage ends, Elizabeth moves back into her apartment, but David has to leave because he only had it on a month-to-month basis. Elizabeth feels like something is missing but can't figure out what it is. While she's looking around, she goes up to the roof where David is just finishing up her beautiful new garden. David explains that he wanted her to have her garden and used the spare key she told him about when she was a ghost. Elizabeth feels like she knows him but can't remember from where. David doesn't want to scare her, so he starts to leave but then stops to hand back the spare key. When they touch, Elizabeth remembers everything and they kiss. The camera zooms out, and the apartment transforms into a snow globe in Daryl's hands. He says, "Righteous." For more insights and breakdowns of intriguing films like this, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.